Alright, what is good, ladies and gentlemen, is the Master Reviewer back again with another review, and today we're doing a review for the movie Soul. This is a rewatch for me. This came out around 2020, I'm pretty sure. I did see it at least two times before. It is in preparation for a viewer recommendation, and with that said, let us just begin, starting off with the plot. So the plot of this film is that basically we follow the main character, Joe Gardner, who is a high school band teacher, but then he ends up getting an offer. He one of his former students calls him basically saying that this very famous musician, jazz player, Dorothea Williams, she needs she has a quartet, and one of the band members, I don't know, skipped town or something. I think they said, don't know what's up with that, but she needs a fourth band member in order to play the piano. And so this is basically Joe Gardner's big break. This is what he's been waiting for all his life, a chance to be a professional jazz player. And so he ends up going to the audition, and he does very well. And so he's very happy. He feels like his life is about to start, but he does not pay attention, and he falls down a manhole. And so at this point, he's not dead, but his soul basically leaves his body, and he ends up in the afterlife. He's about to go to the great beyond, which is where souls go after they die. And he ends up it's actually like, when you're watching it, at least for me, I was thinking like, wow, this is a very tense scene. Like, this man, like, you're just realizing you're about to die, like you did die, and then you're looking at what you're seeing, like all these other souls just like very just like they don't seem phased at all, but when they're basically going to like, I don't, it showed some souls that they end up like floating into this giant like ball of light, and then they just like kind of, it's like flies entering a fly trap, or not a fly trap, but those electrical fly things that are meant to kill flies, like that flies go towards the light and then it zaps them. So it's basically that thing. So I was thinking like in the scene itself, it felt very tense. So anyway, Joe manages to like get out of there. He manages to escape, and then he falls into the Great Before, which is basically where souls are before they actually end up in Earth in a human body. So that technically not humans as well. And they mentioned also like animals. Like there was a cat later on that's later on in the movie ends up like, his soul ends up going to the Great Beyond, so it's not just humans. But anyway, so Joe is now in the Great Before, and there are these entities there that are like in charge of the place, and they think that Joe is a mentor, and basically certain people that they live a really great life, like very inspirational. They end up getting tasked with being a mentor for new souls to help them become inspired to find what their spark is. And so yeah, Joe is mistaken for a mentor, and so he ends up getting tasked with helping this soul 22, which is the soul is like the most difficult soul in all of I think it's called the U Seminar, they call the place. So yeah, this soul just basically does not get inspired by anything, just does not want to go to Earth and live a life. 22 just wants to stay in the Great Before, just doing her daily routine, I guess. So what ends up happening is that Joe ends up making a deal with her, basically that he will help her get inspired, and then he will take the Earth Pass, because the way it works is that once the souls get inspired, they have like a patch, and the whole point is that the final spot needs to be filled in by them in order to, it's their spark, basically their inspiration of what it's not like their purpose. It's established that it's not their purpose of what they're supposed to do in life, but it's like what inspires them to like live, I guess, something like that. So anyway, so Joe and 22, they make a deal that Joe will help 22 get her spark, and then 22 will give her Earth Pass to Joe so he can get back to his body. So that ends up happening, but nothing works. Nothing ends up working out, and they cannot find a spark for 22. 22 just cannot be inspired. It's not really a good setup, because they have all these like they have like this area that souls can go to try to get inspired by different things. And there was this one area where souls could like try different foods and stuff, and like maybe get inspired to bake. But it's really stupid, because like the whole reason 22 doesn't really get inspired in the first place is because the souls don't really have senses. It's like they can't feel, they can't taste, they can't smell. So I don't even know what the point of like the bakery area is, because you can't taste anything, and so eating like does nothing for the soul. So anyway, so 22 ends up taking Joe to meet these like people that it's kind of confusing. They like astro project their souls into the soul realm or whatever, but then they're still like alive. So they end up, the leader of these like people is, I think it's Moonwind, his name is. So yeah, they get Moonwind's help to try to send Joe back to his body, but then they do this like ritual, but it doesn't go. But Joe kind of rushes it, so he and 21 end up falling down, but then they end up falling back down to Earth. But then Joe ends up in the body of a cat that is with him at a hospital, and then 22 ends up in the body of Joe. So from this point, the movie becomes Joe. It's like a kind of, not really body swap hijinks because they didn't really swap bodies, but yeah, now 22 experiences what life is like on Earth in the body of Joe, where Joe is now in the body of a cat, kind of like seeing the world from the perspective. It's like Joe is like following along his body, like with 22 controlling his body, and then he's kind of like getting a different perspective on things with 22 being in control of his body. So that ends up happening. He ends up needing to prepare for this gig he has to perform with Dorothea Williams, and yeah, so there's like a haircut scene. There's a scene where he has to talk to his mom to help him fix his suit. He ends up speaking with this girl Connie, who is in his band class, that she like tells him how she's not inspired to play the trombone anymore, but then she plays for him anyway, the trombone, because she doesn't actually want to quit. It's like her passion and stuff. So anyway, a bunch of stuff happens, and then eventually it leads to Moonwind. They find Moonwind, and then he scheduled, like this was earlier on, but they find Moonwind. They schedule a time where like they can do a ritual to get them back in their proper bodies and stuff. And so when that time ends up coming, because 22 was now living in like an actual body, and she now has experienced Earth like with the actual senses and stuff, she now wants to stay on Earth. Like she actually sees the appeal now of being alive and living and stuff. So she doesn't want to do the ritual, so she ends up running away. Joe ends up also, I guess, trying to chase her down. And yeah, eventually it leads to Terry. I didn't mention, but Terry is one of the ethereal, I guess, one of the entities there in the afterlife. And so Terry is the one that specifically counts to make sure all the souls are being accounted for. And so Terry is the one that is kind of trying to find Joe the entire movie to get him back to get him back to the Great Beyond where he belongs. So Terry ends up catching them and yeah, bringing them back. But before Joe is going to go to the Great Beyond, the other entities basically say, oh, it's standard procedure where Joe is supposed to send off 22, because at this point 22 did actually find her spark. And so yeah, but after this, 22, she is upset because Joe was basically like, at this point Joe was like very upset because Joe ends up like insulting 22, basically saying how she doesn't deserve the Earth Pass because he was the reason that she got her inspiration. She was in his body, and so he ended up like, it was because she was in his body that like she ended up like loving music and stuff like that. So she ends up like becoming very self-anxious about like her, I guess her, she thinks like, oh, I don't deserve to live, I don't deserve like a body and stuff. It's like, because it's not just Joe, and she had like a bunch of previous mentors that also were very discouraging towards her. So anyway, at this point she throws away her Earth Pass. Joe uses his Earth Pass, he goes back to Earth, he does the whole performance, it goes well, but then he realizes that it wasn't all that he thought it would be. And through this he kind of ends up learning the lesson of how life is more than just like your one passion. It's like it's important, the little things in life, like they are what end up making life worth living. Like there's not just like one passion that you should look forward to in life. There's a lot of small things in life that people take for granted that like make life worth living, kind of. So anyway, at this point, he ends up getting in the zone, which is an area in the afterlife where people that like get in the zone when they're into something, like musicians playing music or other professions, I guess. Anyway, Joe manages to get into the zone, which lets him get back to the whole soul realm, whatever. And then he ends up meeting Moonwind there, and then Moonwind helps him now they're going after 22. At this point, 22, because she has lived, she is capable of being corrupted and turned into a lost soul, which I haven't mentioned up until this point, but lost souls are basically souls that become too obsessed with their one. Usually it's like they become too obsessed with their one passion, but I guess in the case of 22, she becomes obsessed with the idea that she's not worthy of living, I guess, and so she turns into a lost soul, and then the final confrontation happens where Joe basically has to tell her that like it's like you. I don't know how to describe this specifically, but basically he tells her, like, he shows her a small leaf kind of thing, one of those dried up leaf things that are in the fall, I guess, and so it reminds her of living, I guess, and then he basically, I don't know, he tells her, I can't really describe how it goes down, but basically he convinces her that she is capable of living and that she doesn't really, I don't know how to describe this. It's like he tells her that he gets her to snap out of her, like, her self-doubt, I guess, and then from there the issue is solved, I guess, and so from there 22 ends up getting she has her Earth Pass now, and then she goes down to Earth with Joe. Joe goes with her, but then he's not going to make it because if you don't have an Earth pass of your own, you can't get down to Earth. And so, yeah, Joe ends up getting teleported to the Great Beyond. He's about to go there, but then the ethereal beings, those guys, they end up basically telling him that it's not often that like they're in the business of inspiration, but it's not often that they themselves get inspired. And so they end up giving Joe a second chance to go back to Earth, basically. So then he goes back to Earth, and they like trick Terry to make sure that Terry doesn't like try to bring him back. And so yeah, this is basically where the movie ends, where Joe said, I think one of the ethereal, they're all called Jerry, by the way, I didn't mention this up to this point, but they're all called Jerry. One of the Jerrys basically says, like, what are you going to do? And he says, like, I'm not sure, but I know that I'm going to make sure that I live every moment to the fullest, basically, where it's like now he's going to appreciate, he's not just going to focus on music, he's going to appreciate all of life and like all the small things that make it worth living and stuff. So that is basically where the movie ends. And yeah, I would give the plot, I'm going to say I'll go 3 out of 5. I thought it was all right. It's got a lot of stuff kind of going on where it's like first, but Joey wants to perform, and then it's like there's the whole stuff that happens in the soul realm, and then there's the body swap hijinks, and then there's not really a good straightforward plot, but I would say it was all right. I enjoyed it throughout. I would say it's just not. I wouldn't say like, not a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5. I didn't love it. I didn't necessarily like it too much. I would just say it was all right. It was all right. So in terms of the characters, I think Joe Gardner is a pretty good protagonist. I do like the dynamic that he has with 22, where he ends up like, they kind of teach each other, where at first it's like Joe trying to inspire 22, but then 22 kind of gives Joe a fresh perspective on living and stuff. So I think that was pretty good. Terry is a fine Terry doesn't really feel like an antagonist, to be honest. Like Terry is the antagonist, but Terry is just, there's a few scenes where we're shown Terry like trying to stop Joe, but it never really ends up leading to anywhere except towards the end, where Terry actually does manage to get them back to the soul realm, I guess. Besides that, there is a few side characters here and there, some people, like some friends of Joe, family, like Joe's mom, Connie, I guess. Like there's just a few other characters. There's not really too many characters, though, in this film. There's the other Jerrys, which they're fine, I guess. Overall, I would just give the characters like a 5.5. I wouldn't say that they're decent, but yeah, not anything too special. In terms of these settings, I think that it all takes place in New York, which I think they do a very good job of portraying it. It does feel like a very, very lively city, I will say. And the dream realm, the soul realm is pretty good, I would say. It does look pretty unique, like very much I was thinking before I started this review, I'm wearing like the exact opposite kind of shirt that the film really, but the film brings a very like blue vibe to the whole thing, and so this red and black shirt doesn't really fit the vibe, but yeah. Anyway, so the whole soul realm, it looks pretty nice, I would say. There is like the barren lost soul area, which is just sand, which isn't as good, but the actual the actual soul area, like with where the main, like all the souls are, the great before, basically, that looks good, I would say. And yeah, again, New York, it looks also good. Not anything like too amazing. I'll go like a 6 out of 10. I'll say it's like above average settings, but yeah. In terms of the visuals, I do think that in terms of the art style, it does look very nice, I would say. Very much on the more realistic side, which I do usually not as much like the more realistic art styles, especially for Pixar. This definitely feels a lot less cartoonish and a lot more like realism in terms of its art style. So I do like it. It does look very nice. But yeah, again, it just is a bit more on the realistic side. But the visuals itself of like the soul area, the ethereal, the Jerrys and and Terry, like the way that their character designs are pretty cool. The actual, anything that has to do with the soul realm looks very nice, I would say. And so overall, the visuals, I would say, are, I'll just go like a 6.5. I'm going to say it's good visuals. It's not some of my favorite, but definitely good visuals, I would say. In terms of the worst thing, I would say that the worst thing is, I'm not really sure. Nothing really comes to mind, I would say. So yeah, I'm looking at my extra notes. Maybe there's something there. No, yeah, I don't have anything in mind for the worst thing, so I'm just going to reuse the worst score, which was, sorry about that, kind of interrupted for a second. I'm going to just reuse the worst score, which was the characters. So I'm just going to go another 5.5 for the characters. Yeah, decent characters, but definitely not anything too great, I would say. In terms of the best thing, I'm going to probably say that the best thing was, I'm not sure, maybe like the whole themes of like living, like enjoying the small stuff in life. I thought that was pretty good. Like in terms of the emotional moments, it does feel like pretty deep. Like this is definitely a very deep film, I would say, in terms of its themes and stuff. And I would say that the themes are definitely very good, I would say, for the themes. So I'm going to say a 7.5 for the themes of living life and just like, not necessarily like living life, but like appreciating the small things in life. I do like the themes of it, and anything that has to do with like the themes of finding your purpose, like purpose, sparks, all that kind of stuff, I thought was very good, I would say. So yeah, 7.5 for that. And let's see here, any extra notes that I did not already mention. No, I already mentioned everything up until this point, so I'm going to do the calculations. So King Crimson. All right, so it ends up coming out to a 6 out of 10, about a 6 out of 10, which will be above average, but I'd give it definitely higher than that. I think I would give it probably like I'm thinking between like a 6.5 to a 7. I'd say it was between good and pretty good, and I'm going to be generous. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I would say that this was a pretty good film, and yeah, I thought that, I'm kind of like comparing it for some reason to A Bug's Life, which I did also recently review, and I think I gave that like a 6.5, but as I let A Bug's Life marinate, I think I would give it probably, I think it marinates a bit, like it ages pretty well in my mind, so A Bug's Life I would give a 7, and I think that this is about on the same level as A Bug's Life, so I would probably give it also I'm going to be generous, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, I would say pretty good, and so yeah, that is pretty much all there is to it. So if you have any recommendations, any shows, movies, video game stories, anime, manga, web series, anything that you want me to review, leave it in the comments and I will maybe possibly check it out. With that said, that is pretty much all there is to it, so let's leave it at that.